Episodes of Palette Swap are suggested by viewers like you. If there's a character you'd like me to analyze, let me know in the comment section down below. Good morrow everyone, Silvershire here, and welcome back to Palette Swap, where I rank the costumes and character designs of your favorite fighting games. And by your favorite fighting games, I mean my favorite fighting games, and by my favorite fighting games, I mean Tekken. Today, we're looking at the world's least stealthy ninja, Yoshimitsu. Again, because we already did the Soulcalibur version. But before we begin our analysis, here's a quick refresher course on who Yoshimitsu is and what we should be looking for in his character designs. Yoshimitsu is the leader of the Manji clan, a Robin Hood-esque band of noble thieves who steal from the rich and give to the poor. He's the latest in a long line of Manji clan leaders to take up the name Yoshimitsu, a tradition stretching back centuries to the Soulcalibur series. During the first few King of Iron Fist tournaments, Yoshi's goal was simply to raise funds for those in need, but after the fourth tournament, he found many of his fellow ninjas murdered by Brian Fury, a man whose life he had saved not long ago. Fueled by the same righteous hatred that had once inspired his ancient ancestor, he set out to avenge his fallen brethren. Yoshi's Tekken 1 1P is surprisingly normal considering how crazy his future designs get. His armor looks sleek and futuristic, but isn't particularly noteworthy. The real star of the show is his hanya mask, which he's accessorized with a pair of earrings and a bright red wig. I assume it's a wig anyway, maybe he has a luscious head of hair hiding underneath all his other costumes. As I pointed out in the Soulcalibur Yoshimitsu video, hanya masks fit his personality well, because they can look both frightening and whimsical. His color palette is silver and red, which one look at my channel should tell you I'm a fan of. I made a joke in the intro about his lack of subtlety, but this game actually provides a story explanation for that. He's meant to be a decoy who distracts the Manji clan's targets while his buddies, who are dressed more like traditional ninja, do the stealthy work. Unlike other weapon users I've covered in this series, Yoshi's sword is dependent upon his costume, so it too factors into the rating, and this one is not great. Between the chunkiness and the bright primary colors, it looks like a plastic toy. I'm sure some of that comes down to technical limitations, but I think a different design could have worked around those limitations better. All in all, this is an okay costume. It established the basics of Yoshi's visual design, but his future iterations are all much more interesting. 5 out of 10. His 2P uses the same mask, but his armor is now much bulkier. I guess this does a good job of contrasting his 1P, but it doesn't make much sense for his nimble fighting style. Also, what the heck is this helmet? It's like a big, pointy semi-cylinder on the back half of his head. His sword is European rather than Japanese, which makes me wonder if this costume was an attempt at knight's armor. Either way, this design is just awkward. 3 out of 10. His Tekken 2 1P is grounded in historical samurai attire. His mask is more humanoid, and it even exposes some of his face. His shade is emblazoned with the kanji for void or emptiness. According to Buddhism, matter is an illusion, and void is the ultimate true reality. This ties into his banger of a theme from Tekken Tag Tournament, which chants no body, no mind, no shape. This motif shows up in a lot of his future costumes, so I'm not gonna bother mentioning it every time. Just assume that if you see a kanji, that's what it is. His color palette is more complex, incorporating some subtler greens, browns, and blues in addition to silver and red. It's not quite as striking, but looks right at home on his Verdant Forest stage. His sword is much better this time around. It's pretty simple, but it doesn't look like he bought it at Toys R Us. 7 out of 10. His 2P is closer to his previous costumes. It continues the tradition of his 2Ps having really weird helmets, because this one looks like some sort of floppy metal beret. His hanya mask is also strange, as instead of traditional horns, there's a flat disc in the center of his forehead with horns etched into it. His color palette is mostly desaturated, which isn't the most interesting, but it helps his blood red sword stand out. I actually think this is his best suit of armor yet, but the head brings it down to a 5 out of 10. His Tekken 3 1P is his most iconic look, and for good reason. It has a similar silhouette to his previous 1P, but the armor now mimics muscle and bone. His mask is closer to a skull than a hanya mask, and it's connected directly to his helmet, which again gives the impression of something organic. It's easy to see how so many people mistake him for an alien or demon. He still has baggy pants though, which lets him maintain a bit of that ninja aesthetic. His main color is now a super desaturated green that makes the black and red accents pop, and combined with his awesome new glowing katana, it gives him a very otherworldly appearance. If you came here for a hot take, I'm sorry to disappoint, because this is an easy 10 out of 10. His 2P uses a lot of the same ideas, combining form-fitting armor, blousy pants, and skeletal imagery. The main difference is his helmet, which has a slimmer, smoother silhouette and a plume of hair sticking out the back. Underneath his armor is a red, blue, and gold floral pattern that spices up the otherwise desaturated palette. Unlike his previous 2Ps, it only changes the color of his sword, not the style. This is a little disappointing, but it still looks great, so I can't really complain. 7 out of 10. Yoshi retains both of his Tekken 3 costumes in Tekken Tag Tournament. Since I don't take graphics into account, the same scores apply. However, he also gets a couple of palette swaps. The recolor of his 1P gives him blue pants, which is fine, but also removes the glowing effect from his sword, which makes it less interesting. Moreover, it doesn't change the color of his armor at all. In the last game, Dr. B's 2P was a gold version of this outfit, and Dr. B's not in Tag Tournament, so I don't know why they didn't reuse it for Yoshi. This is a pretty underwhelming palette swap, but it's a pretty underwhelming palette swap of an excellent costume, so it's still a 9 out of 10. The recolor of his 2P is more substantial. It makes his armor brown, his sword and plume blue, and his clothes black, and it also changes the pattern on his pants. It gives him a sort of antique look, like an ancient warrior returned from the dead. I personally prefer the red version, but this is a solid alternative, and I always like when alternate colors are more than simple palette swaps. 7 out of 10. His Tekken 4 1P leans into the creepy skeleton angle. His armor takes inspiration from a rhinoceros beetle, most notably the horn in the center of its head. He has insectoid wings on his back that only pop out when he's using certain moves such as his famous sword copter, which is a neat detail. Unfortunately, the ninja aspect of his design, which admittedly was always sort of tenuous, is now totally absent. He just looks like an evil skeleton bug dude, which is cool, but not what Yoshi is all about. His color palette is predominantly purple, which pairs nicely with his glowing green eyes and katana. Speaking of which, this is his first 1P that doesn't give him a new sword, but again, it still looks great, so I can't really complain. 7 out of 10. His 2P is a return to form, resembling a modernized mix of his Tekken 1 and 2 1Ps. His hanya mask is back, but it's now metal and has glowing eyes, which gives it a robotic appearance. There's also a demonic face on his back. He's wearing pants very similar to his Tekken 3 1P, as well as sandals and tabby socks, so he's more ninja than ever before. I think I would have preferred this to be his main costume, because it better communicates who Yoshimitsu is. His color palette is silver and red like in Tekken 1, but it's darker overall, which fits Tekken 4's more grounded aesthetic. The only thing I don't like is that this test is a little, suggestive. 8 out of 10. His Tekken 5 1P is based on samurai armor, but of course with a strange sci-fi twist. At a glance, it's difficult to tell what exactly is going on with his face. He's wearing a demonic white mask as per usual, but with a third eye in the center of his head. And on top of that is a slightly blue-tinted glass visor. I think this is a tad too busy, but it does serve to make him look more alien and unusual. The creepiness is still here, but in a subtler fashion. The gold shapes on his chest are reminiscent of a ribcage, and he has long, segmented tendrils snaking out from the back of his helmet. I don't like how bulky this outfit is, but it's not as bad as his Tekken 1 2P. 6 out of 10. His 2P is a zombified version of his Tekken 2 1P, with skeletal chest armor, skulls on his knees, and worst of all, a gaunt, discolored face stretched into a permanent smile. His mouth and eyes never move, so presumably this is just a mask and not what Yoshi actually looks like, but it's hard to tell, which makes it all the more unsettling. His shade is covered in paper talismans called ofuda, which are used in the Shinto tradition to, among other things, ward off and exorcise evil spirits. In this case, it doesn't seem to be working so well. His color palette is pretty dull, but that makes sense for this sort of design. 6 out of 10. His 3P resembles a Soku Shinbutsu, or Buddhist mummy. There are a ton of intricate details, like the miniature skulls he's wearing as prayer beads, the stylized kanji on his sash, the abstract wave patterns on his kimono, and the gold lines that decorate his body. His skin being blue simultaneously adds the alien weirdness Yoshi is known for, and makes it less viscerally disturbing than it would be in a human skin tone. Likewise, his tiny strands of hair and mustache add some goofiness to what is essentially a walking corpse. I've stopped talking about his swords, because most of them are just basic katanas now, but this one is thick and jagged. It looks more dangerous and sinister, even though realistically it would be less effective than a regular blade. 7 out of 10. All of Dark Resurrection's costumes are palette swaps of the Tekken 5 costumes. His 1P is now a bright orangish red. I like the idea, but it's way too saturated. His armor is practically glowing. 5 out of 10. His 2P simply changes the red to magenta. This looks alright, but I don't think it fits the spooky vibe as well. 5 out of 10. His Tekken 6 1P emphasizes his monstrous side. It brings skeletal imagery back to the fore, and the long tendrils that were on his helmet in Tekken 5 are now all over his body. His armor is distinctly less samurai-inspired, instead resembling the chitinous plates of a crab or spider. His tacet looks like a bunch of long, spindly legs, and his shin guards appear to be parasitic creatures that are latched onto him. His color palette is silver and red once again, and it's all super shiny, taking advantage of the graphical leap from the last game. Overall, I like this costume, but it's not as distinct and memorable as his other 1Ps. It retreads a lot of the same ground as Tekken's 4 and 5. 7 out of 10. His 2P is skeleton themed yet again. He's wearing an eboshi, which is the type of hat typically worn by Shinto priests, and combined with his skull mask, it sort of resembles the Grim Reaper's hood. He also has a Dharma chakra on his back, which is an important Buddhist symbol, and the hilt of his sword is a vajra, which is a ritual weapon used in Buddhist ceremonies. The spiritual imagery balances out the macabre design to keep him from looking totally evil. However, like his 1P, it doesn't bring much new to the table. 5 out of 10. His 3P, on the other hand, certainly does. This was an exclusive pre-order bonus costume based on the cardboard tube samurai from the webcomic Penny Arcade, which is a baffling sentence. I'm not a fan of Penny Arcade, so the reference doesn't do anything for me, and the horrifying skeleton face is a poor fit for such a goofy costume. However, the yellow and black palette looks nice, and the Pac-Man logos are a fun detail. 4 out of 10. His Street Fighter X Tekken 2P is another take on the skeleton concept, and I think it's one of the best. I remember reading that this was meant to be the ghost of the original Soulcalibur Yoshimitsu, and I unfortunately can't find a source for that anymore, but this person on Reddit says the same thing, so at least I know I'm not making it up. His body, if you can call it that, is glowing with pink energy, and his eyes a sharply contrasting blue. He also has a bunch of arrows sticking out of his back, which is presumably what spelled his end, although that contradicts the lore of Soulcalibur V. His outfit is relatively low-key, which was a smart decision, because complex armor on top of a glowing skeleton could have easily looked too busy. 8 out of 10. Street Fighter X Tekken also gives everyone swap costumes inspired by characters from the other series. Yoshi's is based on M. Bison, which is an odd pairing but an awesome one. From the neck down, his outfit is more or less a recreation of Bison's, albeit with a more form-fitting top and the addition of a gold ribcage design. But his mask is where things get really interesting. It's actually the logo of Bison's organization Shadaloo, which is usually seen on his hat. This sort of creativity is what I love about swap costumes. 9 out of 10. His Tag Tournament 2 1P is a set of demonic armor that looks like something his Soulcalibur ancestor would wear. There are two main points of interest on this costume. The first is the cylinder in his teeth, which is likely a nod to the trope of ninjas holding scrolls in their mouths in order to keep their hands free. I've also seen some hanya masks with scrolls in their mouths, but I haven't been able to find any reliable info on where that comes from or what it means. The second point of interest is the ring on his back, which I think is meant to be a stylized version of the drums often depicted in images of the thunder god Raijin. I prefer historical fantasy to sci-fi, so it should come as no surprise that this is one of my favorite Yoshi designs. 9 out of 10. His Tekken 7 1P is his most divisive. He looks more alien than ever before, with fleshy, squid-like armor covered in bioluminescent spots and an eyeless, skeletal face. I like the idea of a squid-themed Yoshi, such as his ancestor Soulcalibur III 2P, but I think this strays too far from his core concept. It doesn't look mechanical, it barely looks Japanese, and it's really creepy even by Yoshimitsu standards. I appreciate that the artists tried something so unique and outside of the box, but I hope that Tekken 8 prioritizes the sci-fi ninja aesthetic over the freaky monster aesthetic. 5 out of 10. This costume's alternate color is red, yellow, and green. I'm usually partial to red costumes, but I don't think it fits the aquatic vibe quite as well. 4 out of 10. And with that, we have ranked every single Yoshimitsu costume. I feel much the same way about him as I do his Soulcalibur counterpart. He provides an opportunity for the designers to try some wild stuff, and I don't always like it, but I'd rather see a big swing and a big miss than something safe and boring. But that's just my opinion, so what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below if you agree or disagree with any of my rankings. Also, let me know which character you'd like to see next. For episode 27, we'll be discussing our first SNK character, namely Kyo from King of Fighters, as requested by the Lightning Python and Coil Train. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, I bid thee farewell.